Hello everyone. Hi Akash. Am I audible? Hello. Hi Neha. Hi Ashna. Am I audible to you guys? Jai Hind to you also, my friend. Hi. Nice to see you all. Pavan, thanks. Hi Jaipal, how are you? Good evening, Monica. Jai Hind to you also, Gauri. Perfect. Perfect. This is going to be a one of a kind session because it is something that I've been wanting to talk about for a while, and something that I think is very very pertinent, and something which is not entirely addressed. So you will find teachers who can guide you for polity and economics and geography and so on, but there is no formal structure as much as is required for strategy. The UPSC strategy thing, everybody talks about strategy. What should be the 1 year strategy? What should be the 3 year strategy? What should be my strategy before the prelims? It's a very good question, and it is not a question which has been addressed properly. It is a question which I plan to and hope to address today. So the entire focus of this session, this dedicated session, which I am very thankful that UPSC Guide has thought about it enough to have an entire session about it, and have also compiled some questions that they have from most of the people. And these common problems, have been sort of distilled so that they can be addressed, and that they can be addressed comprehensively, which is what we'll try to do today. So what I want you guys to do is to have a piece of paper and pen along with you, because we're going to need it. I have one with me, and so should you. Get a paper and a pen. It's going to be useful. So like I said, this particular session is about strategy. Who can tell me, which one of you guys will tell me what strategy is? Tell me what strategy is. Good evening. ठीक है, bilingual. I'll try to keep it bilingual. Strategy क्या होती है, और क्या समझते हैं हम strategy से? What do we expect from a strategy? What kind of strategy are we looking for? Are we looking for a schedule, a timetable? Are we looking for a plan of action, in as much as your timelines are plotted as to when you will do polity, when you will do history, when you will do geography, when you will complete it all, and so on? Yeah, right? So that's planning or preparation. But what is strategy generally? Is it just a schedule? Is it just a timeline? Is it just a timetable of goals? I set goals for myself. I say I'll do polity in 20 days, or I'll read Lakshmikant in 10 days. And so for the entire preparation, or the entire general studies, I then plot my goals, and then I try to achieve those things. Yeah, that supposedly that becomes a strategy, an overall aim. I did some research and some reading on strategy, what strategics is, how it is done, and so I realized one thing very important, which is something I need to share with you, which I want to share with you. Yes, somebody is being very accurate, and somebody has mentioned the right thing. You see, strategy is not just a plan of action. Strategy is how you will make sure that you follow that plan of action also. So not only do you require a very good plan of action, which makes sure that if you follow that plan of action, will take you from point A to point B, right? It should take into consideration contingencies, right? There need to be a plan B for contingencies, and your strategy has to be slightly dynamic. उसमें थोड़ी सी चेंजेस की स्कोप होनी चाहिए, ताकि आप अपनी प्रेपरेशन के हिसाब से, जैसे जैसा आप अपनी वीकनेसेस को, स्ट्रेंथ्स को, कमजोरियों को आप समझते हैं, वैसे वैसे आपको शायद किसी चीज़ पे ज़्यादा ध्यान देना पड़े, किसी चीज़ पे कम ध्यान देने की ज़रूरत हो। ये हमको तभी पता चलता है जब हम एक बारी उसको स्टार्ट कर देते हैं। तो स्ट्रैटेजी का मतलब क्या हुआ? व्हाट इज द मीनिंग ऑफ स्ट्रैटेजी इफ वी प्लान इट बिफोर हैंड एंड देन expect to follow the entire thing? So a strategy consists of three things. It's a list of goals. Which is very intelligently planned based on your strengths and weaknesses, based on what you require and how you will get from point A to point B. Yes. Third, it accounts for accountability measures. You need accountability measures. So you require a plan of action, which means the goals, which is the timetable that we usually understand by strategy. You require a means of customizing it such that they help you specifically with your requirements and with your strengths and weaknesses. Third, we need a mechanism to make sure that we remain on track. You see, it's very easy to make plans. Plans banana बहुत आसान है, but plans are never followed. They never tend to pan out exactly like intended. Very rarely it does happen, and in the UPSC exam, it's even more rare because it's a very dynamic exam. You see, it's a very comprehensive and dynamic exam, and the reason that it has been made dynamic is, I think, to kind of force you, the aspirant, to remain in touch with the times, about what's going on in the world, and to be completely aware at all times. So this doesn't require you to just read a bunch of books and be done with it, right? You can't read just a few books and say that I know the content of these books and now therefore I will clear this exam. It doesn't work that way. You not only require that content, you require a means to tailor that content to your strengths and weaknesses, and you require a mechanism to make sure that you remain on track. And that you do not deviate, right? So it consists of all three things. Now I noticed that somebody just said that it requires discipline, and somebody also just mentioned that it requires hard work. So this is completely true, and I agree, absolutely agree, but it requires something else also. Yes, see, it requires you to be able to manipulate yourself to follow a goal consistently for a long time. This is not easy to do. Take any goal, for example. Take weight loss. मान लीजिए आपको weight loss करना और you want a body transformation or something. It's a difficult goal because the body doesn't like to change. It doesn't want to change. So you have to really push it hard for a long time, for 6 months or perhaps 1 year, to make sure that it changes. And then you need to remain on that kind of a lifestyle to make sure that it remains that way. It is very similar in the UPSC exam. We not only want to understand what is written in the history books, what is written in the polity books, what is going on in the world. We need to be able to get into the mold of learning constantly, right? So there are two different types of things, and I will show you certain things which will help you. I suppose I'll give you a very nice template today, and it's not a template which I've really shared with anybody, but because it's a UPSC guide and they are friends of mine, today I will share it. And so the first question which I have in front of me, which has been given, is this: how to start preparation as an absolute beginner? It's a very common question. I guess a large portion of the youth in India at some point in their life must ask this question: how do I start preparation as an absolute beginner? Right? Common question. And even if you're not an absolute beginner, the answer will be beneficial to you, or I certainly hope that it will. And so this is how you do it. First, you try to understand what the examination wants, right? You don't directly jump into the topics. Don't jump into the book list. Don't jump into the content. Don't immediately join a coaching institute, because you might not require it at that time, and you might not even know what you require a coaching for. That takes a little bit of work on your end. The first thing for you to do is to figure out what the examination requires. 1. 2. What do you already have that the examination requires? In other words, what are your strengths? Say you have a background in law, Say you have a background in law. You having that will help you in polity. So that part will become slightly easy for you. Say you have a background in engineering and your optional is philosophy. So no advantage as such. Say for instance that you've done BA or you've done a master's, you have a BA or a master's in English literature, say for instance, and your optional is something else, say it's geography. The advantage which you'll have is that you'll be very accustomed to writing and you'll be very comfortable with language. If you've done a bachelor's or a master's in English, that means that language part of the examination is very well under your control. So that's a massive advantage. You need to figure out what your advantages are. Second, third, you need to figure out what are your absolute disadvantages. Where in this examination, in the syllabus or in the requirements, where are you absolutely zero? Yeah? Where are you absolutely zero? That means you have no practice of it, or if you have practice that it's been too long that the practice is not useful anymore. आप भूल गए हैं वो skills या आपने पहले बहुत पहले कुछ चीज़ पढ़ी थी या सीखी थी और वो अब आपके काम नहीं आ सकती है, वो फिर से सीखना पड़ेगा. ये जानना बहुत ज़रूरी है क्योंकि आपकी स्ट्रैटेजी, पार्ट ऑफ दैट स्ट्रैटेजी हैज़ टू बी, जो भी आपके एडवांटेजेस हैं, जो भी आपके पास ऑलरेडी है, जो आपके स्ट्रेंथ्स है, वट एवर योर स्ट्रेंथ्स आर, as a beginner, they should be always compounded and utilized to the maximum, and you should get better and better and better at those things. So just because you have a background in law and you understand a little bit of polity doesn't mean that you should leave it. It means that you should get so good at it that the question does not escape you. No question in prelims should escape you. No question in mains should escape your understanding. That is how you would put your intelligence and your legal knowledge to good effect in this examination. Similarly, say for instance you did English literature or you did history, for instance. Even in history you would have some writing practice and you would have read quite comprehensively. So history then becomes your strong point. Remember, it's not just something which you have to get over with, right? Just because you know a little bit of it. You need to get better at it so that it becomes your advantage, because when the examination comes, it is these strong points, it is these strengths of yours, these disproportionate advantages which will get you that edge, because the examination is very competitive. Prelims is highly competitive. Every single question that you can get there, every single small probability that can help you increase that score will become vital. And the same thing happens in the mains exam. In fact, I think it happens more in the mains exam than it happens in the prelims exam, I think, because one, it's a very widespread examination. So there are seven examinations in total. You require a very detailed and comprehensive knowledge of general studies, which includes a lot of subjects, obviously. It includes economics and geography and polity and whatnot. You require a very good understanding and depth of maturity about your optional subject, whatever that might be. You need to be very good at writing, because they'll test that in the essay paper and they'll test it extensively also in the ethics paper. So these are the requirements of the examination for the mains exam, and these are also the requirements of the examination as far as those subjects are concerned, right? You need to know these requirements. You need to know where you stand on each one of these requirements. This is your first step. That is how you begin. That is how you start. And I think it would be a very good investment that in the beginning, or even now, if you can afford the time, spend 10 days if it's required, 10 days if it is required, to figure this thing out. This stuff will change everything in the future. It will change your entire strategy. It will inform everything that you do from that point on to the point that you clear the exam. Figure out everything that is required. Does your optional require you to have very good writing skills, or is it a more technical subject? And do you have those skills? What about general studies? How much knowledge of general studies do you have? If you are a scientific, if you are, say, a left brain person, typically engineering background, IIT, DC, whatever, then you might not have a lot of general knowledge, and that's fine. But you should know that. Have you been reading a lot? And do you have a very well-rounded knowledge of certain things? You need to know that. And if you do, then exactly which areas is your knowledge good and exactly which areas is your knowledge not good? Say perhaps you've been reading, somebody is saying Yojana magazine, my friend is saying Yojana magazine. So say you've been reading Yojana magazine, you have a decent understanding of economics and developmental issues. Maybe not so much with political relations or international relations. Maybe not so much with science and technology. You need to know where you stand in the beginning. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are the skills required? How much of those skills do you have? After this, moving on. After this, you need to then figure out what should be your roadmap. What do you need to do to cover everything such that you reach your goal, right? And here is what you do. Let me show you something which I said I would, and so I'll try to do that. Let me do that for you. Do you see this? This is a very useful strategizer for the UPSC examination, which is under development. It has not been released yet. This is the UPSC Navigator. You see, this is prelims. This is prelims general studies. This is prelims CSAT. The syllabus of the CSAT and the syllabus of the general studies is written. Now you'll notice that there are colors. Color coding is there. This is the mains examination. You come down to the mains examination. This is GS paper 1. All the syllabus of GS paper 1, you'll notice that it's blue and it's green. So that means that it includes Indian and world geography and it includes history, right? So that is the mains exam, and those are the subjects that they're going to ask. You know, while reading this stuff here, while reading for history in prelims, you know that it's going to come in GS paper 1 just by looking at the color, and vice versa. Anyway, this is ethics and this is your entire mains exam. But this thing is where your strategy actually comes into the picture. Please note this down because it will help you a lot later. You see, you have to do these 6 tasks before you can say that a subject has been prepared well. What are the 6 tasks? Big picture formation, first reading, second reading, analyze previous year questions, revision and testing. Once all of these are done, then you can say, okay, history is done. So if you're telling me that I have done history, or sir, I'm going to do history, I don't believe you until you've done all of these. That is when you become really prepared for the examination. And you see, all of these things should be dated so that you can track your dates. The estimated date and the actual date, you should have some form of tracking. Now you don't need to have this thing. You can do this on your own. This is just something which makes it a little easier. So you saw that this is the entire thing, and this is another iteration of it in a darker background. Basically, if you are saying I have to do history, follow the green stuff. This is history, and this is the green stuff. This is history. So once all of these is done, history will be done. And so once all of these subjects, these are all subjects represented with gems. If you collect all of these, here you will achieve success, because you will have done all of this, and all of it will have been tracked, right? The dates and the tracking of it and the syllabus of it should be there in front of you. You can do this in any means possible, any way you can, but that is the essential idea. So what did I just tell you? I told you that to claim that anything has been done, you require 6 things. Please note down these 6 things. I call them the hexa task. Hexa task. It stands for, of course, the hex stands for 6, and the task are the 6 tasks. One is big picture formation. Big picture formation. What is big picture formation? Big picture formation. Big picture formation is you taking an overall view of the subject, of figuring out what the subject is. Okay, I have an example here. This is a book. The book is a book. It's a very nice book by a biologist, a very prominent and well-known biologist. I believe he won the Nobel Prize, or maybe not. But anyway, this book is a very important book for the field of biology, and it changed a lot of things. It's a book called on Human Nature. Say I have to study this, and that this is one of the things I need to do to prepare for the UPSC exam. How would I do the big picture formation? What would I do in that big picture formation? Here is what I would do. I would take this book, I would look at the title, I would Google that title, On Human Nature. What is he saying? I would try to figure out what the entire thing is about. What is he talking about? I would look at the index. I look at the index and I see that he has broken the entire book down into certain sections. There is dilemma, hereditary, development and emergence and stuff like that. And you'll find the exact same thing in your UPSC exam, whether that history or geography. This is the stuff, that's how you do it. Begin Googling it. Begin getting a preliminary broad view of the entire thing. Look at images that it shows up. Look at the images which shows what human nature is, or what these sub things are. Form an image in your mind. Remember, in big picture formation, the image should be visual. Humans learn very, very well, beautifully well, when they learn with the help of images. So images have a very powerful effect on our mind. We are visual creatures. We are highly visual creatures, right? So therefore, your learning should be based on visuals, and that's why I use a lot of visuals in my content and in my book, and in fact whatever I do even while studying, I use a lot of visuals. The visuals form the basis of the entire thing. Say you are studying history, and in history you have to understand modern India. Modern India is your target. The chart says you have to do modern India. Modern India is your target. How do you do big picture formation of it? You do big picture formation of it by looking at a documentary on modern India. A documentary will give you the visuals and the narrative. You see, there's a narrative and a story to every subject, to every discipline. It will give you a narrative. You hold that narrative. Then you go on to the textbook, right? That is big picture formation. It's you using Google, using YouTube, using images to figure out what the thing is about, just to form mental images of the subject that you need to do. Then comes first reading. First reading. What do you do in the first reading? How do you begin to consume? You have to consume this 300 or so pages of content, and you need to know it very, very well. How are you going to do it? Well, the way you do it is to go through all those 6 steps. You formed a big picture, then you went to the first reading. What did you do in the first reading? In the first reading, you only read the entire thing without stopping. You looked at the index. You saw, okay, there is a chapter on aggression, on human aggression. Alright? You read the chapter on aggression without stopping, without underlining, without highlighting. Okay? You just read it. If in the middle you find something interesting and you think that I should probably get back to it, then you put a small mark on the margins, like I have done here. See, this is me doing first reading here. I have written a very small note about something I found to be interesting and important, and I don't exactly remember when, because I did this a while ago, but that is first reading. You know, the difference is that in first reading you should not be worried about memory. If you ask me anything from this book after first reading, I will not know much, honestly. I will only be able to give you a general conversation. I could have a general conversation about the concepts in the book. If you ask me multiple choice questions after first reading, I will not get the answers, probably not get the answers. That's first reading. I got the text and I went through it and I used that, and with my big picture formation, I now have a fairly good idea about what I'm dealing with. I then move on to second reading, right? Second reading is when I go into the details. Second reading is when I go slow and I want to take my time and I want to read things and get to know them in detail. This is where I might make notes. notes. And people usually make this mistake. They like to make notes before they even have an idea of what they're doing. It's just the wrong way to learn. If you're going to learn something, and if that content is voluminous, and if that content is heavy, like yours obviously is in the UPSC exam, then you require a procedure, a methodology to take your brain through all the different phases of it. Get the visuals inside it, then get the text inside it, then mold that text and pick out the details, and then fill out all of it inside it, and then test yourself. And only then can you say that I know this book enough. You can test me in the UPSC and I will score well. In the second reading, I start to take detailed notes. This is an example. I have written something. It's not important to know what I have written, but just know that because I have written all of this stuff here, then I must have been thinking about it, right? So this I have shown you to demonstrate that this is second reading, right? This is second reading. What comes after that? It can come after or it can come before, but the third step is analyzing, the fourth step, analyzing previous year questions. I will come to that, Prachi. I'll come to notes. We're getting there. Analyze previous year questions. When you analyze previous year questions, after you have done first reading and after you have a fairly good idea of the content, you look at the previous year questions and you don't worry about whether you get the right answer or the wrong answer. Don't worry about that. You worry about whether or not you know where the question came from. In your reading, did you come across it or not? It doesn't matter if you get the right answer. It doesn't matter if you get the wrong answer. You're only analyzing it. We are doing an audit. You're auditing your own self. You're auditing your own preparation so that you know where the problem lies, right? Don't worry about getting the right or the wrong answer. Figure out where the question came from and figure out how much you would need to know to get that question correct. What would you have to have read to say that the question, that you know the question and that you're able to solve that question? So that is second reading. That is analyzing previous year questions, right? Then comes revision. And this is where Prachi was just asking about note making. This is where note making really comes into the picture. You see, when you're doing the detailed reading of the text, notes should be made. Like I have made these notes here. Some of them are detailed, some of them are not so detailed, but I have made them and I have made sure to highlight the portions of the text which I know I will have to revisit. So this is, you see, some extensive notes have been made here. Extensive notes have been made and some highlighting has also been done. Why has it been done? So that at the time of revision, when I come back and when I do the revision, I know exactly what to look for. I know exactly what I have written, why I have written it, so that it should not take me longer. It should take me a shorter amount of time. I should be able to go through this book very quickly. I want to go through it like this. I want to look at this. Oh yes, I have a point here. I read that point. I think in my mind about what it is supposed to be. I get the idea. I move on, and I do this 2, 3, 4 times. I scan and I scan and I scan and I scan constantly because I have already put it through 2 or 3 iterations in my mind. That is good revision. Everything, beginning from the big picture, going to the first reading, to the second reading, to the previous year questions, and to the revision stage, including your notes, is a form of gradation, so that you have learned the same content in 4 different ways. And I promise you, the quality of your understanding, the quality of your knowledge will be so good after you follow this protocol that you will not get the question wrong. And it will make sure that not only do you get the factual stuff, that you know what happened when, but you also get the conceptual stuff very well. That you don't forget the conceptual stuff, that those things which you've been pondering about because you gave yourself time to ponder. In the first reading, you had no stress on your mind about memorization. You gave yourself time and space to be interested. You took time to be interested in the topic. You thought about it genuinely. You became curious about it. And only then in the second reading did you get into the mold of actually memorizing everything and becoming prepared to be tested on it. You see, it's happening in a sequence. It's not happening in just one reading. And that's what many people and many of my students complain about. They don't know what to do because they haven't done the entire protocol. They haven't followed all the steps. Sometimes I find that people have done first reading of some subjects, but they never went on to the second reading of those subjects. They never went on to the revision of some subjects. What's recommended is that you go through all of these stages, all of these processes, and so that your preparation becomes comprehensive. Moving on to another question which you guys have been asking me. NCERTs. NCERTs, it's a perennial question, it's a very important question. I think that they are very important books, and they're important because number one, they're official books. You see, they are official books from the government of India, sanctioned, and that is the curriculum which the youth of India is educated from. So they are absolutely inescapable. You need to go through the NCERTs very carefully, but you cannot depend on them. The NCERTs are not enough. I repeat, the NCERTs are not enough. The level of the examination is a lot higher than the amount of content in the NCERTs, but the NCERTs are absolutely essential, mandatory, I would say. You cannot avoid them. You have to do them. But that doesn't mean that it has to be boring. That doesn't mean that you have to read those books that you are so happy to escape from, which you were done with from school, and you don't ever want to look at them again, but then you have to do them all the entire thing again because you're now preparing for the UPSC examination. No, not like that. You see, the NCERT books are just manuals. They are manuals which contain the list of topics that you need to know about. If I pick out the NCERT of geography, and if I am looking at something, say I am looking at westerlies, or I am looking at the movement of monsoons, the NCERT does not tell me everything I need to know. It only tells me how the basic geographical phenomena works. It might tell me about El Nino. It might tell me, okay, the wind start to blow in the northwest direction from the Bay of Bengal, and then they take a sort of a turn because of the Coriolis force or whatever, and then they meet, and then we have rainfall in the upper parts, and that this rainfall is very important for some crops. Yes, that's not enough. That is essential. That is the bare minimum that you need to know about monsoons. You need to know a lot more about monsoons than just that. But the fact that it is mentioned so explicitly in the NCERT books means that it should become top priority in your list of topics to understand and know about. How do you understand and know about that? Quickly follow the 6 steps again. Quickly do that. Don't spend much time. Google monsoons. You'll get a Wikipedia page. Scan through it, look at images, look at YouTube videos, see what videos it throws up. Don't spend too much time. Watch 1 or 2. Maybe you will find a very good explanation videos. Like there are some really good explanatory videos on YouTube now, 5-minute explanations. Some of them are animated. Some of them are very rich with content. Very, very good explanations are available. You looked at that and you got a very good idea. Okay, now this is what I mean by monsoon. So the guy explains it to you. You go back to the NCERT and you read that entire thing then again, and you form a richer picture. When you go to the NCERT again, then you pay attention to the details and you try to memorize as much as you can, right? Those are the basic steps which you need to follow. And I have told you about the NCERTs. I have also explained how they should be read. They are bare minimum and essential resources for this examination, which nobody should skip, and which everyone must do, but they're definitely not enough. Definitely not enough. Another question which I have, which I would love to address. With about 9 months left, can we start preparation now? With about 9 months left, can we start preparation now? The answer is yes. But you need to figure out how much time you will be able to commit. to the 9 months. 9 months doesn't mean you have the entire 9 months, right? If you're working, then you can take out a massive chunk of that 9 months. If you have other responsibilities, you need to rule this, factor it in. The second question to ask yourself is, how many attempts do you have? How important is it for you to clear the examination in this attempt? Can it be done in 9 months? Yes, it can be done in 9 months, but those 9 months you can't do anything else. For all intents and purposes, it will be a very difficult 9 months. You'll have to work extremely hard, excruciatingly hard, but it can be done, right? Now, given that you have 9 months, what are you going to do, and how are you going to do it? Do you remember what I told you at the beginning of this session? The first thing for you to do is to figure out where you stand on this particular day. On the day, whatever day you are on, whatever stage of preparation you are on, whether you started already or you're about to start, you need to figure out from scratch that as of today, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, right? Even as an absolute beginner, you will not have all weaknesses. There will be some areas of strength. Maybe you're good with language, maybe you're good with polity, maybe you like reading the newspaper, so you know a lot of general studies. Maybe your optional subject is very strong because you spent a lot of time in your graduation studying and reading about it. But you need to know what those things are. Second, you need to then figure out what are the things you absolutely know nothing about. What are the things which you are not at all competitive in, right? That you know nothing about. And once you have this over the entire spectrum, and by the spectrum I mean there are about 17 in this chart here. There are 17 divisions approximately. So I read it out to you. There's English, there's math, there's history, polity, geography, economics, environment, science, tech, current affairs. There is ethics, integrity, aptitude. They're all three. I treat them separately because they require some special training. There is essay and answer writing, deconstruction. Then there is the optional subject. So this is a lot of work, but you can take this. In fact, let me show it to you. You can take this stuff. These are the main divisions that you need to cover. All of these are subjects, right? You need to cover all of this stuff, and you need to do the 6 steps of all of these. So if you've done the 6 steps for math, you get this. You get the pink gem. English, you get this one. For history, you get this, and so on. All of these have to be done. Now, the reason that they have been divided into these, these blocks, is because all of these sections will take approximately the same amount of time. You notice here that ethics I have mentioned here. Ethics includes ethics, integrity, aptitude. And essay writing is not one thing. Essay writing is deconstruction, structured brainstorming, SLGO, whatever that means, I will get into in another date. But essay writing, you will notice, is this big of a section is essay writing, this big of a section is ethics, and this entire section, which my hand is spanning, is GS. This is CSAT. This is CSAT, GS, ethics, essay, optional. Why this division? Because that is the exact weightage of these things. The entire thing, 60% of the whole thing is GS, so this is GS, and you need to divide this GS equally, your time equally among these different parts. Why ethics and why 3 divisions? Well, because it consists of 250 or so marks, and it's a very important paper, so we divide it into 3 parts. And why essay? Same with ethics, 3 parts, it deserves 3 parts. Optional, this may get a little bit more extensive, but for the sake of convenience, I've kept it at 2 parts, and it forms basically a proportionate kind of a system, and you plan your entire strategy according to this division if you want. Of course, you can choose to do it. In another way, but that would be a very effective way to do it. I had to talk to a lot of toppers and a lot of people to arrive at this design, at this structure. It took me more than 6 months to design this into a perfect structure so that everything is covered. You see, an additional problem with the UPSC exam is that there are 3 stages and 6 subjects. in GS, which are distributed across the stages. So you will get the 6 subjects in GS: history, economics, geography, polity, science tech, and environment, whatever. And you will get the same exact 6 subjects in mains, distributed over 3 papers: GS paper 1, GS paper 2, GS paper 3, right? And in addition to that, you will get essay, and you will get ethics, and well, a bunch of other stuff. How should an aspirant prepare themselves so that if they do history, if they are spending time in history, then they spend only the amount of time that is required. They spend only the amount of time that is required, so that their effort is maximally optimized. They can do prelims and mains together. They know exactly what they're doing, so they don't have to do it again and again. What should be the entire distribution of the syllabus in equal proportionate parts, so that the entire game can be covered in the least amount of time? That was the challenge, and it was not an easy challenge. It took me a long time to figure it out. Before I arrived at this hexagonal structure, I had to, it was only a sequence, a linear sequence, and a list, basically a list. Now, what's the problem with lists? You see, the problem with lists is that lists tell us that I should do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Sequence. There is no sequence in the UPSC examination for the subjects. Maybe you do prelims first, maybe you do mains first, maybe you do essay writing first, maybe you start with polity. It is a different strategy for everyone. How should the syllabus be structured so that anybody can come into it and have their own strategy at their own pace, at their own convenience, according to their own strengths? That was the goal. And the reason that I'm telling you all of this is because you can take all of this stuff and use it in your strategy. The name of this poster is the UPSC Navigator, the ultimate UPSC Navigator. You cannot get it because it has not been released, because only 2 exist in the world, and one of them is hanging here. And in time it will be released, and then you can have it. But so far nobody else has it, because I have not released it. I will release it soon. Coming to the next question: how should the strategy be to select optional subject? I believe somebody was asking me also, how should I select the optional subject? Big question and important question. The optional subject is very important, and what you need to know is that the UPSC examination requires definitely a higher level of understanding for the optional subject than it does for the other subjects in general studies. You're expected to have an understanding of at least the master's level or a somewhat postgraduate level in order to do well in the optional subject. Now, how do you choose this? Obviously, if your optional subject is corresponding with your graduation subject, you like the graduation subject and you have a decent control over it, then there is no question about the choice. Your graduation subject becomes your optional subject. But say that is not the case. Say you didn't like your graduation subject, or perhaps you did not enjoy it at all, or maybe you did graduation in something which is not feasible as a UPSC optional, like for instance economics, right? Like for instance economics. No, not economics, math. Take for instance math or engineering. If I did engineering myself, and I would not even dream about attempting the UPSC paper from my graduation subject. That would be suicidal, and I know, because I was not very good at it, to be honest. And that may be the case with you. So then in those cases, what do you do? Well, here is what to do. You start to figure out, by looking at these subjects, which one aligns most with your strengths and your interests. Here is the difference here. I am saying you figure out the optional subject which aligns with your strengths as well as your interests. I mean that the optional subject is just the strength that you have is just one. It is just one. If you have interest in it, it is just one advantage. It doesn't mean you will become successful. It just means that you have found one advantage, interest. There are others. और कौन से advantages होने चाहिए? जिसको हम कंसिडर करें बिफोर मेकिंग अ चॉइस, in the UPSC exam for the optional. One is interest, the other very important variable is what is the requirement of the optional subject in the mains exam. लैंग्वेज कितनी इंपॉर्टेंट है उस सब्जेक्ट के लिए और कितनी स्किल है आपको लैंग्वेज की ऑलरेडी. व्हाट डू यू ब्रिंग टू द टेबल? टेक फॉर इंस्टेंस माय ओन सब्जेक्ट फिलोसफी. I took 3 subjects and I enjoyed all 3 of them. Take philosophy for instance. अब philosophy should not be taken because उसका syllabus छोटा है, because it is a manageable syllabus. Philosophy should be taken if you have interest in it. 2, if you are very good with language, because language is absolutely critical to philosophy. It is a game of language. Like mathematics is a game of symbols, right? Arguments in mathematics and proofs in mathematics are symbolic. You have symbols and there's an entire language, which mathematics is. Philosophy is a game of, it's a similar type of game using English, mostly English. So your command on language and precision of expression for philosophy is very important and very good. What are similar requirements for history? What are the similar requirements for geography? For history, you need to be extremely well read. The volume of reading is enormous. That is the challenge of history. You should be able to distill your insights from whatever you read in history. You should be able to distill it in the examination. You need a mature understanding of the events and how they were interpreted, right? That is the challenge of history optional. History optional, I am saying, not GS. What is the challenge for psychology as a subject? What are you going to do about that? Well, about that, you have to be very well versed with the science, with the cognitive science. You see, psychology, if you go deep enough, if you try to figure out what the thing is, psychology is not at all a flim-flam, feel-good type of subject. It is a scientific discipline. And the only people who do well in psychology are the people who have that scientific bent of mind. Because it's all about data, it's all about the research, it's all about how the research was done, what the research concluded, and what is the statistical significance of that psychological research. Only then do we say that this is something worth mentioning and yes, okay, this is an insight about the minds of people that is worth noting. Highly scientific. Don't make the mistake of presuming that you can get away by writing just English in psychology. Won't happen. Similarly, geography. You need to consider this. Again, please take some time while considering it. I have created a tool called the Optionalizer. I call it the Optionalizer, which will help you choose. I'll release this tool and put it in an article and release it. And so you can just take that, it will be like a quiz, and it will be a self-rating type of a thing. You'll rate yourself and it will tell you what is the best optional for you. But it only works after you have boiled it down to 3. Your job is to figure out the top 3 optionals for you. What are the top 3? Rule out all the others. You boil it down to 3, and then between those 3, use the Optionalizer tool to figure out the best. If not 3, then 4. If not 4, then 5, but not more than 5. 5 is also, I think, way too much. I think not more than 5. Not more than 4 should be there. And then you can use the Optionalizer to do what you need to do. Okay, somebody is asking about sociology. Sociology. What should be the mindset of a person who will probably do well in sociology? And about political science. I will try to answer both. Sociology is, you see, it's all about the way humans organize themselves in social hierarchies. If not hierarchies, then whichever way they organize themselves in. Humans are primates, right? We are descended from the apes, we are primates. And all primates, आपने देखा होगा National Geographic पे, chimpanzees, orangutans, all primates have very rigid social hierarchies. एक alpha male होता है usually, especially in gorilla societies, and ethologists do a lot of research on this, and they organize the society on a structure as a hierarchy होती है. There's somebody at the top and then everybody over there. We belong to that kind of animal. We are that type of animal, and we need to understand that we are very complicated, much more complicated than apes obviously. तो हमारे जो social structures की organization है वो काफ़ी complex है और उसमें बहुत सारी considerations हैं. उस हायरार्की के नीचे कौन है और उसको ऊपर कैसे बढ़ाया जाए, दिस इज अ सब्जेक्ट मैटर फॉर सोशियोलॉजी. हाउ सोसाइटी इज स्ट्रक्चर्ड, व्हाट आर द डिफरेंट टाइप्स ऑफ स्ट्रक्चर. कुछ जगह पे मैट्रिलिनियल societies होती हैं. For instance, there are some cultures in Kerala where the structure of society is not patriarchal. It's matriarchal. It is the female who dominates. And in certain animal species also, you'll find very very peculiar matriarchal society. You know, hyenas are one of them. Hyenas. They don't look like it, but in hyenas, the leader is a woman. Not a woman. The leader is a female hyena, not the males. Even though they are predatory and they are very vicious and aggressive creatures. What are the different ways in which humans structure their societies? That's sociology. उस structuring से problems क्या होती हैं? कुछ some parts, some portions of people get left behind. How do you bring them up? That is a subject matter of sociology. What about political science and international relations? Many people have asked. Political science and international relations, I think, to my honest understanding, is a subject for somebody who is interested in power and who's interested in geopolitics. What is geopolitics? You know, what is international relationships? That, my friend, is basically just how power in the world is distributed. Geopolitics is nothing but the play of power. Who is the alpha male in the terms of the country, and how do people get there, and how do you improve? That is the entire gamut of political science. Again, that social hierarchy thing comes into the picture. There is always either one or two superpowers. Whenever we have more than one superpower in this world, we've had a confrontation. A very good example is the Cold War between the USSR and the United States of America. You know, again, and to understand the intricacies of how countries deal with each other, how countries play with each other to gain domination or to prevent aggression, is international relations. That is international relations, right? Political science is about the distribution of power in a particular culture, right? So power is distributed not only amongst different countries, and that's international relations. Power is distributed between a culture. Who among us in our society gets to become the king, gets to become the ruler, gets to become the dominant caste? Is it the aristocracy? Is it a merit-based system? Is it a monarchy? Is it a republic? How should a human society be structured and power be distributed? That is the ambit of political science. I hope that answers your question. For public administration, I honestly find it's a peculiar subject. It's a peculiar thing. Public administration is an MBA for the government sector. It's like an MBA for the government. You have, management and a lot of programs about how a private organization should be run. How do you run an organization or a company effectively? How do you do that? The way to do that, in the people who study this thing, the people who study the logic and the science of running corporations and companies, is management. When people study the same thing in government settings, that's public administration. There's nothing more to it than that, honestly. That's all there is. You want to know about anthropology, Siddharth? Okay, I'll tell you what I know. In fact, this book that I was reading is very much pertinent to anthropology. Anthropology, my friend, is how we came to be the type of animals we are now. How did humans evolve from apes? How did we get to develop this complicated, rich, scary, intimidating global civilization? And what were the milestones that we had to surpass, that we had to overcome to get here? The invention of fire, the introduction of the non-vegetarian diet after the invention of fire, that led and that allowed us to intake a lot more calories in a single serving. which led to an increase in the brain size, in the volume of the prefrontal cortex, and the neocortex then started to develop, which then led to us having better functionalities, better executive functions, better logical thinking, more planning, more execution, which then led us to cooperate with each other, which then led to the development of language, which I'm using now, which you are using now. All of this, how all of this happened, is anthropology. What evidence do we have that it happened is anthropology. What tools did our ancestors use? That's anthropology. Anthropology is the story of how we got here, essentially. A very, very beautiful book which I always recommend to people who are studying either anthropology or psychology. Either anthropology or psychology or economics. Anthropology, psychology, economics, you should read Sapiens. Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. Either you read that or you, I guess, you look at some videos on YouTube which can give you a very good summary, and you don't have to read the whole thing. It's about 400 pages or so, and so that you could do. Well, Anni, psychology, you want to know about psychology, that is my subject, very much part of my daily life as well. I did my master's in clinical psychology. Very recently I completed it, and psychology was my optional. I have cleared the examination with psychology. And what psychology is essentially the study of behavior. Why are humans the way we are? Why do we make decisions the way we are? What goes on in our minds? And how do those things influence us? And how do they influence our thoughts? Psychology. Very amazing and interesting subject, but not necessarily easy to score in. Please make a note of that. It's not easy always to score in psychology. But it is a very, very interesting subject, and it deals with why people are the way we are. And when something goes wrong with the mind, and you have disturbances of the mind, you have depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, you have schizophrenia, and so on. What happens? What goes wrong in the mind that leads to these things? And what happens in those things? That's clinical psychology, that's abnormal psychology. A very, very big part of the field of psychology is dedicated to addressing these mental health issues. Then there is positive psychology, which focuses, on how to make your mental health even better. So I think about psychology like this. Take this pen here. This is one end of it. This is the other end of it. This end is the worst mental health possible. Depression. This is depression, schizophrenia, and suicidal, absolute worst mental health possible. This is best mental health possible. Like, this is like a Buddhist monk whose happiness levels are off the charts, right? Where do you lie in it? Most people lie in the middle, right? Clinical psychology, abnormal psychology is focusing on this part here. Why do these things happen? How to help these people who have mental disorders. Positive psychology focuses on how do Buddhist monks and other people achieve these states of happiness, and how much can we push ourselves from this place here to this place here. So that's psychology. I hope that understands. I hope that clarifies some things. I certainly hope so. And then the question is, when should we start answer writing practice as beginners? When should we write answer writing practice as beginners? I think you should begin doing that as soon as possible, because I'll be very honest here. Answer writing and essay writing is something which is, these are skills. These are skills. These are neuromuscular skills. This is not easy to do. If you tell somebody who has no understanding of writing and no experience to be able to write, it's going to take a while, you see, because the mind has to first understand that it needs to think about a certain thing. It needs to learn how to organize all the information. Then it needs to learn how to put all that information in a good format and create these sentences and those paragraphs and so on. This is a skill. It's a neuromuscular skill. It's a mental skill. It is not the same as consuming information. It is not the same as reading. It is an entirely different skill which will require different parts of your brain to be recruited. So you need to prepare for this in the beginning itself and continue this preparation as you go. It's very, very important. Don't leave it at the end, because it is not about content. The challenge with essay and answer writing is completely different. And the challenge is that you may or may not have any content. You may or may not have read any book. You may or may not have read the entire syllabus at all. What you need to do is to be able to put your thoughts in a very well organized manner on paper on exam day about a particular topic. Can you do that? Have you done that before? That is a skill which is being tested, much like swimming. Can you swim? And if yes, how fast can you swim? It's like climbing a rope. It's like riding a bicycle. It's a skill. You either know it or you don't. And it takes a while to get to know it. But that also means, mind you, that once you know it, it is never forgotten. Once you get the flair for writing, once you start enjoying the process of writing, you never get rid of it. You don't ever have to. Everywhere you go, it will inform you. And not just that, if you become better at writing, you will become better at thinking. There is a very powerful and deep connection between our thoughts and our language. The language that we use and the thoughts that we think are very, very codependent. They are not mutually exclusive. They go together like this. If your thoughts improve, if they become more streamlined, your language will become better and clearer. If your language becomes better and clearer, you will start to think in a more clear manner. You might have noticed that there are people who do not hesitate while talking, and they have a continuous flow of information, and all of their sentences come out well formed and well structured. That is not only because they are eloquent or they have a very solid vocabulary, or they like to talk about things and they like to be heard. No, that's not the only reason. The reason is that their thoughts are clear also. The thoughts are clear also. Now, you could have somebody who has very clear thoughts but not very good language. In fact, take any mathematician who's not very inclined towards language, or take an engineer who's not very interested in writing as such or expression. They will have very clear thinking but probably not very good language. In essay and answer writing, you need to have both. That's my input. Mathematics. Nilesh, I am not qualified to comment about mathematics because I have never studied it professionally. I can, however, tell you one thing about it. Mathematics is different from all other subjects. You either love it or you don't. Do not mess with the UPSC unless you love it. I'm telling you this very seriously, based on a lot of reading about. I'm very fascinated with mathematics. Just never did it professionally. Perhaps someday I will. But it is almost like an art form. Doing math is like having an experience, especially higher mathematics. And the only way you will do well in it is, I think, when you really enjoy it. And that's very important. So keep that in mind. Rachna, I can't comment about civil engineering. I simply don't know enough about it. Philosophy, I do know a lot about it. It is my subject. I am fascinated with it. I continue to be fascinated with it. I read it, and I did speak about philosophy before, and so you can always go back and look at this recording of this thing. And okay, so I'm getting a question here. Should answers be diplomatic or honest? Neither. They should be absolutely crystal clear. If you are answering questions in the UPSC, it should be absolutely crystal clear. No diplomacy is required. If the question is asking you to critically analyze, you critically analyze. Obviously, you should not say anything which does not have any basis on evidence or fact. You should not be only giving your opinions. You do not have to be emotional. You have to be very analytical. And you have to be very clear, right? Accountancy is an optional, can't comment, don't know about it. I found it very boring always. No offense to anyone. I just never got it, never understood why anybody would want to read it as a subject, And the same with forestry, I don't know much about it. I do know about physics, math, psychology, philosophy, perhaps economics, sociology. I've commented and I have told you what I think about these things. Let me go on to something else before I wind this up, because we don't have unlimited time. There is the issue of current affairs. That's a big issue, and what I want to tell you about current affairs About CSAT, let me interrupt that and address this. Anupriya, for CSAT, all you have to do is go to brilliant.org, go through their modules and practice, and you will be able to figure it out. It's not difficult, and it's okay if you don't have the preparedness in the beginning, but it's fairly easy to develop, and you don't require a very high score in the CSAT. It's only qualifying. So go through the brilliant.org, their questions, and I think it's free or whatever it is. It's certainly worth it, and that will take care of your issue. Let me come to current affairs. It's a very important topic, and because current affairs is, well, it's as vast as general studies, or even more vast than general studies, because it involves the dynamic nature of the world and everything that goes on in the world, whether that's a new technological development or what's happening with COVID, or what's been happening with Afghanistan. Everything that happens which affects a lot of people is current affairs. Please take a note of that. Everything that happens in the world and affects a lot of people is current affairs, and you should be interested in it. It's your duty to be interested in it, because you're a UPSC aspirant. It should affect a lot of people. That was the only criteria. Is then an Olympic gold medal current affairs? Why is it current affairs? Why if somebody throws a javelin and wins a gold medal, why does that become a very important current affair? Because it affects a lot of people. Why does it affect a lot of people? Well, because we have a symbolic attachment to winning, and he represented our country, and so it has helped, I suppose, in developing a much stronger self-concept, or whatever the psychological reasons are. The fact that javelin throw impacted a lot of people, has an impact on a lot of people, becomes your qualifying criteria, and that thing becomes a current affairs. What else is a current affair by that logic? Afghanistan is obviously a current affair, not just because it's in the news, but because it affects a lot of people. It affects people who are Indian, some Indian, and not Indian. It affects India as a whole, because obviously now you have a neighbor, and there's a change in the power structure of that neighboring country, and so that affects India definitely. But also because there are Indians there, and also because of many other reasons. India has investments there, and so on and so forth. When I said that everything that impacts a lot of people is current affairs, please note that it does not include the topics which do not appear in the news. Topics might be very important for a lot of people and yet not appear in the news, but they are current affairs for you, and you cannot ignore them. There is a difference between what appears in the news and what is current affairs. So in the news and in the newspapers, you might find articles which don't impact a lot of people. Sometimes, perhaps, that's not current affairs for you. It's only current affairs if it has a sizable impact, So therefore, entertainment is ruled out. Entertainment news is ruled out because it does not impact a lot of people. It only impacts people momentarily. It serves a different purpose. Everything outside of that has an impact is current affairs. That includes every treaty that is signed, if it's an important one. It includes every important scientific development, because that might change the world tomorrow. It includes every important prize given, every Nobel Prize given. It includes every Abel Prize given. It includes what the United Nations is doing, because it's the United Nations. It's literally the only supra-governmental body on earth. What's important for you, for instance, is in current affairs, a recent report by the United Nations on climate change, which has made certain predictions. And this report was released just a few weeks ago, I believe 3 or 4 weeks ago. It was not highlighted in the news very much. It was not spoken about, and it was not shown in headlines. It was not highlighted nearly as much as it probably should have been, but for you that's a current affair. and because it's a very, very important aspect of life, because it could literally change the earth as we know it. And so that's very important for you. And so you have to have that mindset. You can't depend only on the news. You have to be able to filter out and be very aware of the type of content that you're consuming. You know what I mean? Yeah. And the last question, okay, second last maybe, because it's an important question. Is excellent vocabulary required for answer writing and essay writing? And I'm not great with my English. Fair question, good question. How to improve English? Important question, good question. I think you improve English by, number one, exposing yourself to English a lot. What do I mean exposing yourself to English? Here's what I mean. Say you go to say you go to France. You go to France, you have to live in France and you have no choice. You have no choice, but you have to live in France. You will be bombarded with French left, right and center. Your landlady will speak French. You go to buy vegetables, he'll speak French. You speak to somebody on the phone, they'll speak French. Everybody will speak French. You'll hear a lot of French. You switch on the TV, French will start pouring out of it. Switch on the radio, you'll hear French. Music, French. Television, French. What happens with so much exposure is that the brain itself, it begins to absorb things and it begins to make patterns out of sounds and it begins to understand language. It starts to understand and it starts to make associations. The language centers of the brain start to become sharper. If you are not good in English, means only one thing, that you have not been exposed to too much English, and that is completely fine. It doesn't matter, because you probably did not require to be exposed to English all that much. If that is a requirement now in the UPSC, then you can begin to do that. And in fact, while reading general studies, while reading your optional, if you have to read all this stuff, and you have to read all of it is going to be in English. If your examination and the medium of exam is English, you will be exposed to it, and it will be enough exposure, believe me, enough exposure to get you to that threshold. So there is no problem as such. You will figure it out. The English will improve. Yes, you will have to do certain practice. It won't improve overnight. I would say give it at least a 6-month period before you can say that you've noticed noticeable improvements. 6 months. It is a slightly slow process of getting actually better at it, but it does happen, and it happens with a lot of exposure. And a very good way to expose yourself to English now is YouTube. Very good way to constantly bombard yourself. Another very good way would be audiobooks. Even if you don't want to invest the effort to sit and read, which is admittedly an effortful thing to do, you can always plug in your earphones or whatever, whether you're traveling or you're driving or you're sitting in your room, in your study table or whatever. You can expose yourself to English for those 15, 20, 30 extra minutes every day, and I can assure you that it will make a difference. It always does. Right. And the last question, is coaching necessary to crack the UPSC exam? The question is coaching necessary to crack the UPSC exam? I think it is not necessary. Is it useful? Probably yes. Is it necessary? No. It's not. It's not necessary. You can clear the examination without coaching. Of course you can. Absolutely. Does it help? Can it help? Yes. Provided you know what you require help in. You should know exactly what is it that you require help in coaching. Consider yourself, like an Olympic athlete. You are going to go to the Olympics and you will be competing. Okay, that is the UPSC examination. There are all kinds of coaches out there. Somebody will teach you one thing and somebody will teach you another thing. You need to figure out what type of coach and the coaching for what do I require so that I can reach my goal. First you figure this out, and this brings me all the way back to when I began this session and I started to talk about how you need to figure out what your strength is, what your weakness is, what you know a lot about and what you know nothing about. And you then take the decision about coaching accordingly after doing your research, if you even require it, right? Again, the decision of taking coaching and what coaching to take is only appropriately taken if you have done some work and figured out what exactly is required, and then you take it. Maybe you don't require it. I know many people who don't require it. They have not required it, and they have cleared the examination without coaching. They have. Many of my batchmates have done that. Some of them join test series. Maybe you are the type of person who only requires test series. Maybe you are the type of person who requires somebody to take you through the content also. So then only and only then do you require classes, right? But you need to figure out what is required after a very honest assessment, after a very honest conversation with your own self. So that, I think, will be the last question for tonight. And I have always enjoyed these conversations between you and myself. Today was not an exception. Today was very interesting. I hope you learned a lot. I hope that I was able to clarify some doubts which you had, that I brought some perspective to your preparation with the six tasks that you need to do in order to prepare to everything else that I spoke about. And I'm always there, and I look forward to more of these conversations with you. I'm always happy to help. Thank you, Ritesh, Saiful, Utkarsh, Swapnil. Thank you to you, Devender. Thank you. Oh, that's my friend, Tesfy19. Balaji, thank you. Person is choosing career as Indian Foreign Services. What option is best? I can't say. You'd have to go through a lot of analysis to figure that out. Srishti, you're most welcome. Fahad, figure out for training, you mean? What subject? For prelims, more weightage. You can't predict the weightage for prelims, my friend. You have to do everything, and everything should be in a very, very fair amount of detail, because you will not be able to predict what they ask more, what they ask less. Like I said, the division of the subjects which I have done in this chart over here is a fairly good estimate to go by, and it won't fail you. Okay, then I will sign off now. Good night. Have a good time learning, and be honest with yourself. Work very hard, and take this opportunity of the UPSC preparation to re-educate yourself. Become curious about the world and re-educate yourself, and I promise you the results will surprise you, and the results will go beyond just the UPSC examination. Take care, and I'll see you very soon. Okay.